in and out. Now, imagine a courtroom. Wooden benches, marble floors, the air thick with incense and power. At the front, a man in robes, eyes cold, voice calm. He speaks of law, of justice, of order. But behind those words, another truth hides. Justice here does not belong to all. Picture this. A black man stands before the judges, hands bound in chains. His skin is scarred. His back carries a memory of whips. His eyes hold something dangerous, silence. Not fear, not guilt, silence. The kind that waits. They say he killed his master. They say he should burn. But what they never say is why. The courtroom is full. White men in powdered wigs, soldiers at the door, whispers slithering like snakes between the pews. At the center, the accused stands barefoot. The shackles at his ankles clink softly with every breath. And when the judge begins to speak, his voice echoes off the stone walls. Justice will be served. But whose justice? Whose truth? Because this is not just a trial. It is a ritual, one the empire repeats again and again. A man born in chains is judged by the very system that forged him. A man denied humanity is asked to answer to a law written without his name. And still he stands. His name, Joao, or maybe Kwame, or maybe no name at all. History erased it. But what it could not erase was the moment, the heartbeat in that courtroom when the world turned upside down. Let's go back to the days before that trial, to the plantation, to the heat that burns through bone, to the field where Joao was born, where he learned that the sound of the whip was older than his own name. He worked, he obeyed, he survived, until one day he saw something that broke whatever was left of obedience. Maybe it was his wife's cry when the overseer dragged her away. Maybe it was his son's lifeless body, beaten for a stolen mango. Maybe it was the laughter, that cold, godless laughter of the master, drinking wine as lives crumbled at his feet. Whatever it was, it lit something inside him. Not madness, not rage, clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a man understands there is no justice left to beg for. Picture Joao at night, under the same stars that watch centuries of suffering. He sharpens a blade, not for vengeance, for truth. Because sometimes the only way to expose injustice is to let it bleed. The morning comes. The master calls. Joao kneels, pretending obedience. And when the whip rises, the blade flashes. One motion, one cut, centuries of silence sliced open. They say the master's blood soaked the floor. They say Joao stood still, breathing hard, then whispered something before they took him. Now we are equal. That's what witnesses claimed, though the empire never wrote it down. But truth rarely fits inside the empire's paper. And so he was taken, dragged to the city, chained like a trophy. The court would make an example of him. They would remind every enslaved soul what happens when a man forgets his place. But Joao didn't forget. He just decided to define himself. The courtroom doors open, chains rattle, and the story truly begins. Take a breath with me. In and out. Now picture it. The courtroom again. But this time, the silence feels alive. The air smells of wax, sweat, and fear. Everyone is gathered to witness what they call justice. But what they will see is truth. Joao stands before the judges. His wrists are bound in iron. A soldier's hand grips his shoulder, forcing him to kneel. The judge looks down, expression carved from stone. On the table lies the bloodied whip that once marked Joao's back, now presented as evidence of discipline. The irony burns. The very instrument of torture, now used to justify the torturer. That is colonial law, cruelty disguised as order, punishment masked as peace. State your name, says the judge. Joao answers quietly, but the courtroom does not hear his voice. They hear his chains. They echo louder than any word. To them, he is not a man speaking. He is property making noise. The prosecutor steps forward. His voice is smooth, rehearsed, dripping with false righteousness. He speaks of loyalty, of betrayal, of how Joao murdered a good Christian master. He paints the master as merciful, gentle, a man of God, and Joao as the serpent in Eden. The crowd nods. They love a story where evil has dark skin and virtue wears a crown. But Joao does not speak. Not yet. He watches. He listens. He lets the lies fill the air until they begin to choke everyone who breathes them. Pause. You can almost feel it. The shift. A tension no one can name. Crawling across the room like smoke before fire. The prosecutor finishes, chest heaving with pride. He turns to Joao and sneers. Do you deny it? Do you deny striking your master? And finally, Joao raises his head. His eyes meet the judge's. And in that moment, time seems to stop. I do not deny, he says. I only finish what your God refused to see. A murmur sweeps through the courtroom. The guards move closer. The judge slams his gavel. But Joao keeps speaking, calm, steady, unbroken. You say he was my master. But man who owns another is not a man of God. You call this justice. But justice does not wear chains. You say I sinned. Then your world is built on sin. The courtroom explodes in outrage. The prosecutor shouts for silence. The judge demands order. But the words are already loose. And words, once freed, do not return to their cages. Because what Joao says next is not just for them. It's for us. I have lived every law you wrote. I have obeyed. I have bled. And still you call me beast. So if justice belongs only to you, then I will make my own. And then he moves. In one impossible moment, the chains snap against the floor. No one knows how, whether by strength, rage, or something divine. He lunges forward, grabbing the sword from the nearest guard. Screams fill the air. Chaos erupts. The courtroom, once a temple of power, becomes a battlefield. For a few seconds that feel like eternity, Joao stands at the center, holding the blade once meant to control him. He points it not at a man, but at the system itself. And then, slowly he drops it to ground. I have already killed him, he says. And he doesn't mean the master's body. He means the idea, the world built on chains. The guard sees him. Blows rain down. But the silence that follows is different now. Not the silence of fear, but of realization. Everyone in that room has seen something they can never unsee. A man in chains standing taller than those who claim to judge him. Because this is the moment where law breaks and truth begins. They drag Joao away. Blood drips down his face. Staining the marble, the judges whisper, shaken. The crowd cannot look each other in the eyes. Because somewhere inside they all know something sacred has cracked. Outside, the city keeps moving. Horses clatter. Bells ring. Life pretends nothing has changed. But deep beneath the noise, the story has already begun to spread. A story that the empire will try to bury. Did you hear? They whisper. The slave spoke in court. The slave made the judges tremble. And in the plantations, in the dark corners of the night, those whispers turn into something else. Songs, prayers, promises. If he stood before their law, we can stand too, because a rebellion that begins in words is always the one they fear most. Joao's body will vanish, but his act, his defiance, will survive in memory. And memory is a kind of justice that no empire can burn. Take a breath with me. In and out. The courtroom is empty now. Only blood remains. A dark stain on the floor, half scrubbed, half remembered. The gavel lies broken. The empire pretends to move on, but something has shifted. Something they cannot wash away. Joao is gone, dragged into the dungeons beneath the courthouse. No one knows what happened next, and that's exactly how they wanted it. There are no records, no verdicts, no last words written. Only silence, and silence, in empires like this, is never absence. It is control, because what follows is not justice. It is punishment disguised as forgetting. They erase his name from the ledgers. They destroy the transcript of the trial. They forbid the slaves from speaking of it. But the story escapes. It always does. Truth is like smoke. It finds cracks. In the plantations, whispers grow. They killed him, someone says. They buried him beneath the courthouse. No, another voice answers. They burned him but he didn't burn. And slowly, Joao stops being just a man. He becomes something else. A symbol, a myth, a living ghost that walks through the fields when the moon is full. Because every empire fears two kinds of slaves. The one who runs and the one who refuses to die. The masters tighten control. Curfews grow harsher. Punishments become spectacles. Every week, the square fills with bodies hanging from gallows. The air thick with warning. And yet, when the bell tolls at midnight, some swear they hear another sound. Chains clinking not in bondage, but in defiance. Joao walks tonight, they whisper. He walks through the fields where he once bled. He walks through the court where he once stood. He walks so we remember. The legend spreads like wildfire. In Salvador, in Havana, in Charleston, the story finds new names, new faces. Each telling reshapes it. In one version, Joao kills his master with a judge's pen. In another, he laughs as the gallows break beneath his feet. History loses a man, but gains a symbol. And that is what terrifies the empire most. Symbols cannot be chained. Think about that for a moment. A man's body can be whipped, but his memory, that belongs to the wind. It passes from one generation to the next, whisper from mother to child, in stories told at night when the masters sleep. Don't be afraid, they tell their children. Joao still stands. Now picture this, a young enslaved boy in the fields, years after Joao's death. He works under the sun, the same fields, the same silence. But in his heart, something burns. He remembers a story. He remembers a man who spoke truth in a place built on lies. And when the overseer shouts, when the whip cracks, he clenches his fists, and he whispers, "Justice trembled once. It will tremble again." That is how rebellion survives, not in wars, but in whispers. Because there is another kind of consequence, the one history hides best. The guilt of those who watched. Years later, one of the judges writes a letter. He is old now, his hands shaking as he puts quill to paper. He doesn't mention Joao by name. He calls him the man who defied the court. And he writes, "I saw him, and in his silence, I saw God." The letter was never published. It was found centuries later, yellowed, buried in a forgotten archive. And in that line, a confession the empire never meant to give. Do you feel that? That shiver that runs through history when silence breaks for just a second? Because the real power of Joao's story is not the blade, not the trial, not the blood. It's the echo that still moves through time. The echo that turns shame into courage, pain into prayer, death into defiance. Now imagine walking through a colonial town today. Tourists pass by churches and courthouses, snapping photos, reading plaques that tell half the truth. None mention the man who stood there in chains and made judges tremble. But if you stand still, if you listen, really listen, you might hear it. That faint rhythmic sound. Not footsteps, not whispers, but the steady heartbeat of a memory refusing to die. Take a breath, because this is where history turns into warning. Empires love forgetting. They write silence into their monuments. They decorate their crimes with marble and prayer. But beneath every polished floor lies a stain. And every time someone remembers, the stain darkens again. Joao's name is gone. His bones are dust. But the world still trembles with the sound of his defiance. Every revolt that came after, every fire lit, every chain broken, carried a spark. So when you hear the stories of rebellion, when you see the statues of kings and generals, remember this. Some heroes wear crowns, but others wear scars. Because we are almost at the end, and yet this story never really ends. Somewhere in the rhythm of the drums, in the hush before storm, in the silence between heartbeats, he still stands. Not as a ghost, not as a myth, but as a mirror. And the question his story asks is the same one we must face today. When justice serves power, who will stand for truth? When the world bows to silence, who will speak fire? The judges wrote nothing that day. But history wrote eternal. Take a breath with me. In and out, we've walked through the fire. We've stood in the courtroom where chains spoke louder than judges. We've seen silence weaponized, justice twisted, memory buried. And now, here we stand, centuries later, still listening for the echo of a verdict that was never written. Because what happens when history itself becomes a crime scene? The courthouse where Joao was judged still stands. Its stones are cool to the touch. Tourists pass through, guided by soft voices explaining colonial architecture, Portuguese craftsmanship, historic preservation. But they do not speak of the blood that once stained those floors. They do not mention the man who made justice tremble. If you press your hand against the wall, you might feel it, a faint pulse, deep in the stone. It's not your heartbeat, it's his. Because truth, once spoken, never really dies. Pause again. Let me ask you something. If you had lived in his time, if you had stood in that courtroom, watching the guards drag him away, what would you have done? Would you have looked away? Would you have whispered your pity in secret? Or would you have stood, even if your voice shook, and said, "This is not justice"? It's easy to believe we would be brave, but courage is never easy. It burns, it costs, it changes everything. And yet, courage is the only reason you and I can even speak these words today. Because every freedom we know was born from someone's refusal to kneel, from someone who said no when the whole world demanded yes. Joao did not win his trial. He did not walk free, but he did something greater. He broke the illusion that justice belonged only to the powerful. He showed that truth, even in chains, can make thrones tremble. Because that's what the story is about, not victory, but awakening. The moment when a man condemned by law exposes the rot within it. The instant when fear changes sides. They killed his body. They erased his name. But the fire spread anyway. Across plantations, across continents, across generations, until rebellion became not an act, but a memory, a whisper at night, a drumbeat in secret, a prayer spoken in two languages, one for God, one for the ancestors. That's how resistance survives, not through books, but through breath. Picture it now. The same courthouse, long after his death. New judges, new laws, new flags. But under the floorboards, beneath the polished marble, the same bones rest. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the windows, it sounds like chains breaking. Because history haunts the places that try to forget it. Think about your own world, right now. The systems that claim justice. The voices still silenced. The truth still buried under polite words and golden walls. Can you feel it? The same tension that once filled that colonial courtroom still lives in us. Different uniforms, different laws, same silence. So here's the question, the only one that matters now. If justice trembled once, will we let it stand still again? Because Joao's story is not about revenge. It's about reckoning. It's about the moment the oppressed stand not for blood, but for truth, and force the world to look in the mirror. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a second. Listen. Do you hear it? The clinking of chains? The slow echo of footsteps through time? That is not just history. That is inheritance. We carry their echoes in our bones. Every act of courage, every cry for freedom, every heartbeat that refused to bow. And so, the moral is simple. You can silence a man. You can burn his name. You can bury his body under centuries of stone. But you can never bury what he awakened, because memory does not die. It waits, it watches, it rises again when the world needs it most. Look at the world around you. Ask yourself, who are the ones in chains today? Whose voices are silenced by systems still pretending to be just? And when the time comes, will you stand like Joao did? Will you speak, even when the room demands silence? Because the story of the slave who killed his master in court is not just about the past. It is about every courtroom where power stands above truth, every street where the oppressed still march for dignity, every moment when fear tells you to stay quiet, and memory whispers, don't. So tonight, as we end this story, I want you to remember one thing. Justice is not what is written. It is what is remembered. And memory is our verdict. Take one last breath with me. In and out. Now listen, truly listen. Do you hear it? The distant echo of a man in chains, standing tall before the court, his voice cutting through centuries of silence? That is not the sound of death. That is the sound of defiance. That is the sound of memory delivering its sentence, because silence was their weapon. But memory is ours. If justice was built on chains, then memory is the fire that breaks them. Subscribe for more stories on broken chains. What do you think of this hidden history? Leave your comment and keep the fire alive.